What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you my competitive $100 Endymion deck profile. This is an amazing time to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Simply because there's been so many cards that have been reprinted thanks to in part to the Megatins and plenty of other cards that it's actually very affordable for you guys to hop into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And get a taste of what it's like. So I wanted to bring you guys this deck profile. I know yesterday I covered doing an introduction to Endymion, give you guys an overview of some of the basic interactions between the cards, but now I'm going to show you guys that you can build a competitive tier 1 Endymion deck for under $100. That's absolutely crazy. So before we get into it, I do want to let you guys know that we have Pro Play Tour Columbus coming up on October 12th. $2,000 prize pool, only 20 bucks to enter. And if you get your invite, you'll be invited into the $10,000 invitational taking place in January. And of course, I'll be there doing live stream commentary coverage for the event. So links are in the description if you want to pre-register, and I hope to see you guys there. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So kicking things off, we're going to start with the main deck, of course. We have 3 copies of Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic. This is essentially our boss monster, although it's not like our main win condition, but it kind of doubles as like a secondary win condition because there are some decks that actually have a very difficult time dealing with this. I mean, Sky Striker, I think their only out is something like Ningirsu, and if they don't play it, then they actually, I don't even think have an out in the main deck for this card. So being able to not be targeted or destroyed is crazy, but it's also a spell and trap negator, which is insane. Like, it's 2800 attack, huge body, you can add it to any of your combo boards. Just such a solid boss monster. Yeah, it's got a lot of text, but it's definitely well worth running at 3. It's also a high scale, which also can matter. Now we have 3 copies of Servant. This is the deck's pretty much key play starter. Like, if you see a hand with Servant and a bunch of spells, like, you should be good to go. Servant is just absolutely crazy. Being able to tutor for any of our cards that can take spell counters on them, so you can get Master, you can get other cards in the deck here like Jackal King, and really just set up for the majority of your plays with having Servant in the scale. Just an incredible card. We do not want to run less than 3. Now, since we are playing Endymion, we are going to be playing 2 copies of Magister and 1 copy of Reflection. Magister is really good because it allows us to also get stuff from the deck, albeit it is on our opponent's turn. But we can also special summon stuff from the extra deck, which is nice. You can send pretty much anything with something like, let's say, Electromite, so it's very easy to get to what we want, so that's not too difficult. And then Reflection is nice as a one-of because maybe if our hand gets a little bit cloggy, it's a way to get a card out of our hand that we might not otherwise be able to, although we are playing Pendulum, so that shouldn't be too difficult. But its ability to bounce cards that basically dodges that destruction of protection from destruction, like say stuff like Thunder Dragon Colossus or anything like that, that does actually come in handy. So I think that bounce, like pseudo Kieran like removal, is pretty powerful, and just having as a one-of for this budget variant doesn't really hurt too much. Continuing on with our spell counter cards, 3 copies of Jackal King. I think this is mandatory, especially because Nibiru is in the format. You want to see Jackal King pretty much as possible, because if you can establish a Jackal King before you get to 5 summons, then you don't have to worry about getting Nibiru'd, and that is where this deck can shine compared to other combo decks, which might have a little bit more difficulty being able to play around cards like Nibiru. But if your opponent isn't playing Nibiru, it can play around stuff like hand traps, and at the very least, it's going to eat up a negation for an effect your opponent may have during their turn. Such a solid card, no reason to play less than 3 of it, at least in my opinion. Next up, we have all the supplementary Pendulum cards, so 3 copies of Dark Worm, as well as the one of Gate Zero. This is our best normal summon in the deck. Typically, we don't want to normal summon it, we want to dump it off of something like Dragon Shrine or Foolish Burial, but if we absolutely have to, it's still a +1. It's a dragon, which enables our Guard Dragon combos. This is just such a key play starter to the deck. It's pretty much probably second to Endymion herself, but having the Dark Worm is absolutely essential. Next, we have 3 copies of Chronograph Sorcerer and the 1 Time Gazer. Again, these are just good for getting bodies on the board to help get us to Electromite without having to commit to our normal summon. If we can get to an Electromite without using our normal summon or having to resort to a Pendulum summon, that's going to put us in a very powerful position, because then our Pendulum summon is going to be very strong. Chronograph also is very good because it just allows us to get other bodies onto the board. Time Gazer protects our cards from getting hit by Ghost Ogre, which Pendulum is naturally weak against, and people still forget that Time Gazer actually has an effect on the field, so that is pretty relevant. But overall, just a very solid include, and just being able to put Chronograph in the scale to give counters to Servant is absolutely key. Next up, I've got 2 copies of Abyss Actor Curtain Raiser. The reason for this is very similar to Chronograph, where we just want to get bodies on the board for Electromite without committing to our normal summon or Pendulum summon, and it gives us counters on our Servant of Endymion. If we can get her to 3 counters more quickly, then that's exactly what we want to do. Curtain Raiser may be only once per duel, but it's a dark, which also synergizes with some other cards in our deck. It just pretty much fits the bill all around, and I definitely think it has a good place in this deck. And then wrapping up the monsters, we have 1 copy of Destrudo, the Lost Dragon's Frisian, and 1 copy of Aether. Now, Destrudo is there just as an extender if you need to do any sort of plays, but ideally we want to use it towards the end of our combo just to end on something like one of our Synchro monsters that are in our extra deck. And then Aether, the Evil Empowering Dragon, is basically there as a target to summon off of our Hieratic Seal Heavenly Spheres, but at the very least, you can still Pendulum summon it out. You can even hard Tribute summon if you actually absolutely have to, but obviously that's a last resort, but it's just a very good way to add another layer of disruption into our very solid combo-based boards. That's it for the monsters. Very heavy monster count because it's Pendulum and we need to play as many combo pieces as possible. Now to supplement that with the spells, we have 3 copies of Spell Power Mastery, probably the single best spell in the entire deck because A, it fetches Servant, but B, it puts more spell counters on Servant if we have multiple copies in the graveyard already. If you have Servant plus this, you're going to immediately get 2 spell counters on the Servant, means you only need 1 more just to get Servant online. Such a good card. Being able to fetch any Endymion card in the deck is also very key. 3 copies of Allure of Darkness. I think there's 18 targets in our deck that are dark. I think the only non-darks in the deck are like Magister and Reflection and Servant herself. I think every other card is a dark. So we want to turbo through our deck, get to our power cards, but also this helps fuel Servant. Allure is not once per turn. I don't know why that is, but you know, hashtag old Yu-Gi-Oh, but Allure of Darkness is just such a good card in this deck. I'd highly recommend going that route. 3 copies of Potted Desires. A lot of you guys may not agree with this, but I feel like it's absolutely mandatory in this deck. Every card in this deck, as you've seen, we're basically playing at 3, except for some random one-ofs like Destrudo and Aether, which we don't really care if we lose them. Having the ability to not only get spell counters on Servant, but to draw 2 more cards in a combo deck is huge because that means your boards are going to be even more explosive because you're going to have more cards to combo with and be able to play through more of your opponent's disruption. So 3 Potted Desires I feel like is absolutely essential. You can maybe cut it to 2 if that makes you feel more comfortable. That's fine, but I see no reason in this deck not to, especially because you're playing a combo deck, and especially because you're playing everything at multiple copies. 2 copies of Dragon Shrine paired with 1 Foolish Burial. This is essentially just to get to our Dark Worm as quickly as possible. Also, you can get Destrudo if you already have Dark Worm, so you do have some tutor ability there as well, but Dark Worm is going to be the target 9 times out of 10. That way you can just special summon without having to waste the normal summon and get all your plays going. Also, it's a spell card for Servant, so that's another reason why that's important. We are playing 2 copies of Secret Village of the Spellcasters paired with a Terraforming. Terraforming obviously because it's a spell card for Servant, but Secret Village, it's just such a blowout against so many different decks. I mean, if Sky Striker is a huge part of your meta, you're just going to basically auto-win that matchup every single time. It's also good against the Mirror Match because it's a ton of spells there. There's so many different decks that just rely on tons of spells, and this is more of a meta-specific pick, but for a budget variant, we need to have some sort of blowout cards in addition to what our deck is already capable of doing, and I felt that, you know what, Secret Village fits that bill very well. And lastly, we have 1 copy of Upstart Goblin because it's literally a free spell counter. We get to draw another card deeper into our deck. There's no reason not to play it. So that's going to do it for the main deck, 40 cards even. Let's go ahead and get onto the extra deck here very quickly. We have Heavy Metal Foes Electromite. It's our main extra deck play starter. If you're playing Pendulum and you're not playing Electromite, you're doing something wrong. Then we have the Guard Dragon package. So it's 1 LP, 1 Aggerpain, 1 Triple Burst, and 1 Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres. You're going to go through all 4 of these every single time you do the combo, so you definitely need to have all of them. You could play Pisty if you want. I'm not playing Pisty in this specific deck, but some players do, and I think that's perfectly fine. 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix. This is just nice to out problematic cards if your opponent may have floodgates, like maybe Anti-Spell Fragrance, or things that are really going to cripple the deck. You want to have the Phoenix as a way to out those particular cards, because otherwise it may be difficult for you to out them naturally, and Phoenix is a very generic way to do that, and it's also a link too, so it helps you link climb into something like your Triple Burst so you can combo afterward. 1 copy of Beat Cop, and 1 copy of Wee Witch's Apprentice. These are just generic Link 2s. I mean, well, Wee Witch needs darks, but our deck is pretty much all dark. But they're generic enough that they allow us to just go into further plays. Beat Cop allows us just to have extra arrows for pendulum summoning. Wee Witch is more for OTKs because since it boosts all of our dark monsters by 500, it makes getting above that 8k threshold a lot easier, just because if you have Wee Witch already, it's 1900, and then you just need, what, 5100 more points of damage, or excuse me, 6100 more points of damage just to OTK your opponent. And if you're playing a deck, as you've seen, of all darks and they're all really high power, there really is nothing to worry about. Then we have Boral Sword Dragon, which pretty much makes OTKing a breeze if you absolutely have to go that route, as well as Borreload Dragon. Boral Sword Dragon is now very affordable for you budget players. I think it's like 10 bucks a copy now or something like that. So if you don't already have it, you should definitely pick it up. And Borreload Dragon's a common, so it's definitely worth getting. Borreload just also outs things that our deck might have difficulty outing naturally, just because it dodges stuff that has protection from targeting, protection from destruction, because it takes the monster. Just a very, very solid card, and it's very easy for us to climb into Link 4s in this deck. Then for the Xyz, we have 1 Abyss Dweller. Abyss Dweller is just huge in any of the graveyard-centric matchups like Salamangreat or Orcust or anything that just relies on the graveyard. Dweller can just shut that out. 1 copy of Tornado Dragon. Tornado Dragon is very strong just because it blows away opposing back row, so this is going to be good against your rogue decks, you know, your stuff like Altergeist, your Draco matchups, or anything that just relies on back row, or if we need to take out problematic floodgates, Tornado Dragon is going to be a good option for that, kind of in the same light as something like Nightmare Phoenix, but we can access it in different ways. For the Synchros, 1 copy of F.A. Dawn Dragster and 1 copy of Borreload Savage Dragon. Now, I will say, Savage Dragon's probably the most expensive card in this entire deck, and if you absolutely need to play this deck and you can't afford a Savage Dragon, that's fine. This card's like 25 to 30 bucks, so that's what, like a third of our budget. So if you don't need to play it, swap this for something else. It isn't mandatory, and that way you can stay within that budget. That might be the only card that actually pushes this above $100, but it's something that it's very strong if you can afford it, just because it's another negation. F.A. Dawn Dragster is just fine. I mean, it's going to only negate spells and traps, whereas Savage Dragon can negate monster effects as well. It's also bigger just because it can also take the Link monster from the graveyard and bolster its own attack points, but, you know, it is what it is. Both cards are very good at what they do, but you can easily swap Savage Dragon out for any other card. That can be your Pisty slot. That would be a much more affordable option. And then lastly, we have that Vortex Dragon as our target for Agripane, and just solidifying the combo boards that this deck is notorious for. So guys, that's going to do it for this deck profile. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Again, this is such an amazing time to play Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're a budget player. Definitely take advantage of it before the prices go up, because this is something that we don't see very often, and I want to give you guys all the tools possible to dip your toes into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And maybe see a competitive side of things. So guys, that's going to do it for the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, and if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.